And thank you, Philippa, for the invite. Look, I'm speaking to you today from Kokomolarigi country, which is the home of the Wallara clan. We're at about 300 meters elevation, 90 minutes northwest of Cairns, and we're basically at the foot of the Cape York Peninsula. So, look, in this presentation, I'll offer critical commentary on the role of capital in the ecological economy. I am quite critical of it, and I'll briefly outline a counter proposal, but to no great depth. I just want to say that all the answers are in my paper, okay? So, but I'm not going to tell you what they are. You'll have to go to the workshop materials and download them for yourself and review them later. But I do want to dig into some of the issues around markets and just take a step sideways. You can see I've already changed the title of the presentation. So I've decided it's more from the edge. I really want to say that we're in the market. We're in the market for love, and really take that as a theme to go forward with. So look, I'll just get my thing going here, where my next button is. Okay. Much of my recent inspiration, I just want to let people know where I'm sort of coming from at the moment. It's great people and research in this space, including the people here today, which is absolutely fantastic. But some of the key reference texts that have shaped my thinking in the past couple of years are like Dieter Helm's Green and Prosperous Land, which has helped shape some of that UK policy we've heard about earlier. Tim Jackson's Prosperity Without Growth, which I think really frames up where we're going to go as an ecological, how we're going to survive the next century. Jason Hickel's Less is More is very much in the same line. Charles Massey was referred to earlier, Call of the Reed Warbler, fantastic Australian story. I know Damien would have gone across all that, and Philippa mentioned Charles as well. Robin Wall Kimmerer is a variation on Charles, but fascinating book based more out of the U.S. and the U.S. indigenous experience there, braiding sweetgrass. Anna Singh, if anybody's heard of that, Mushroom at the End of the World, terrific story of post-capitalist precarity, which again makes us think about where we're currently basing our conversations today. Gabrielle Chan just launched an amazing book called Why You Should Give a FCK About Farming. That just came out a couple of days ago. From what I've seen of it so far, it's amazing. And I'm just getting through Robert Heinberg's Power at the moment. When all these are fabulous places to help expand the conversation that we're having today and maybe get a bit more air and breath into the conversation, which I think is absolutely important. Let me just say that I think we're probably here all today because underneath everything, we're trying to contribute to a more flourishing, resilient, and equitable world. And that's probably not just for us here in the lucky country, but for all people and indeed all living systems. That's an important point. So back to the topic today, I think there's two streams of thought that are kind of weaving their way through this conversation. The first is the idea of payments for ecosystem services. I know that wasn't terribly popular with Ms. Pierce at the first, but I use it in a very general sense. It's like, how do people get money for doing things related to, and I think that's a really good thing, that people get more money for doing good ecological services. Or you can provide ecosystem services. But then there's the second idea, and that's relying on market mechanisms to drive investment. And I think that's going to be an entire mess. And I'll explain why. So when we talk about markets, it's important to realize, to kind of take a step back and ask ourselves, what do we mean? What do we refer to right now in the context of PES programs? What's a market? And this is it's a great word, market. It's a terrific word. This is a picture of a lovely facility in Delhi. I think I've probably been to this one. It conjures up these beautiful images that we bring markets. This is where buyers and sellers meet, they meet, they talk a bit of trash about each other. It's not so good. It's even better than you think, and maybe after a bit of tough negotiation, they go and relax and get a little supply-demand massage by the invisible hand. And this is markets, okay? And that's been going on for a very long time, and it has a nice human scale dimension to it. But really, that's just not the reality anymore, especially when we start loading a lot of capital into the story. So that's when things start to change. You start getting this picture. This is fast, it's computerized, and capital is hungry. Once markets get to a serious size, they shift. They lose the human dimension. And it's because capital is a very brutal sort of thing. It's focused on growth. It has to have a return. Has to have a financial return. And it doesn't rest. It doesn't pause. It doesn't sleep. Capital is relentless. So I don't think these sorts of high-speed trading desks are what we mean when we're talking about markets for ecosystem services. And if that's the case, if this picture isn't what we mean, but we do want to have a lot of money in the system, we have to sort of ask ourselves, what is it we're talking about with markets? And I think the way we're going about it currently is we use the term market in this sense. First of all, we'll create a trading proposition, a platform or set of regulations. So we create a trading proposition. And then somehow or another, we'll provide a bunch of goods on one side of it. And then step three, a bunch of moneyed up buyers will appear over the horizon and money starts to flow and things start to happen. That's fantastic. But really what we're talking about is how to get a bunch of money to flow through the environmental sector. And why is that? Why are we talking about that? Well, it might seem obvious, but if you think about it, we want to invest in the land. That takes a lot of money. We need people to do research, analyze and observe things, live on country, and that takes money. We want farmers to change their practice so that they can afford to take care of the land, build natural capital, biodiversity, resilience, and all of that takes money. But under the current economic ideology, there's not enough money. So in the real sense, we're using the word markets here now is how can we drag a bunch of new money into the sustainable land sector? That's what we mean when we say we're going to build markets for ecological services. But here's the conundrum that baffles me about that picture. So if we go back to first principles, no one of us actually knows how to build a wetland from scratch. We can't do it. We can't do it without the cooperation of billions of other than human entities. In other words, all the other people that aren't people, the other than human people that are out there that constitute the living world. They're the ones who actually build the wetland. They're the bacterial elements, the biota, they actually do the work. We live in complete codependence with an unimaginable complexity of other living beings. And this has been obvious for our whole evolutionary journey. It's obvious to everyone in the room today. But if you think about it, we've talked all day long so far about how we communicate better with capital. How do we communicate with money? Oh, maybe markets are a good idea. Ooh, maybe incentives, maybe regulation. We're communicating with ourselves. None of us have touched on so far the tradition of communicating with these other essential entities. If you go back over history, in fact, just about all of history, people have always communicated with these essential other entities, the other than human. They develop ritual, they develop ceremony, meditations, cultural protocols, habits of observation, habits of self-limitation and discipline. That came up earlier in the conversation today as well. People have talked about and built into their cultures a whole raft of cautions against taking advantage of the other, because that doesn't work out well in the long term. And because we don't speak the language directly, we have to have some way to embed those cautions into our culture so that we behave appropriately. And our entire human history is built on the wise insights and instructions of countless generations of people who knew their lives were enmeshed in the living framework of the other than human world. That's why we have values such as humility, respect, and above all, reciprocity. These things are wired in to the enduring wisdom traditions and cultures of the world. Now, onto the stage of history strides Plato. Not that long ago, actually. And then he stooges around for a while, and then you get Descartes. And Descartes, and from there, the entire mechanical mind, dualism, dumb nature, colonial project sort of proceeds. There's a lot to be said there, and I do say a bit of it in the paper. But as a result of this kind of what I would like to think of as like an unfortunate cultural aberration, which really was only about 20 generations ago, still well within, it's just a misstep about 20 generations ago. Our culture in particular, the Eurocentric cultures, we managed to combine the idea of dualism, which is the separation of human and nature, the separation of mind and body. That idea, we combined that together with the sort of the insanity or the idea of unlimited financial growth, capitalism, and then we convinced ourselves that everything's for sale. The rest of the entire world is like inert stuff. It's all inert matter that can be bought and sold, traded and consumed, optimized for the market. And in this world that we're swimming through now, which just become like totally closed around us, we've completely forgotten what it means to live in reciprocity with the other than human. Instead of that, we've got one tool called money. And so everything we look at is a problem of money. Now, that wouldn't be the end of the world, except for here's the kicker: we've made money scarce. You wouldn't believe it, right? The one purely imaginary variable in this whole complex situation, the one piece of the puzzle that we all have complete control over, that one thing, we've agreed to make it scarce and then become enslaved to the idea of unlimited growth. It's quite strange. It really is. So try making sense out of this is what makes it really hard, at least for me, to be content with dabbling around the edges with markets for ecosystem services. They're just going to get swallowed up in a much larger delusion, which is this thing about how money it has to grow and how everything else is inert matter and has no cause or agency of its own. So this is the one language that we've absolutely forgotten, is the language. The one language we speak now is the one language that nobody else speaks. The one language you speak is money. Nothing else in the world speaks that. It doesn't care, right? All right, I'll speed up now. The predicament we find ourselves in is that money is actually an incredibly efficient mechanism for people to form cooperation networks. And cooperation is really at the heart of how life works. So it's actually really good for people to form cooperative systems with one another. Money's fantastic at that. It's the first truly global framework for doing it. But we're kind of drunk with the power of it. And in fact, we're a bit too drunk. So the other than human world has absolutely no interest in all these little digits that we shuffle around on our spreadsheets. It's got no interest in that whatsoever. So we have got
just a couple of minutes to wind up there, please, John.
Yeah. Thank you, Tim. I've got my little timer going. We've got to reimagine our relationship with capital. Peter Thompson said, money is a great way for people to communicate with each other, but it's a terrible thing to stockpile. And maybe that's a clue. I'll just quickly show you this one. Farming is often cited as occupying a vast stretch of the landmass, but it's kind of deceptive. Almost all of that is for grazing various forms of livestock, which has its own sort of impacts, but only 22 million hectares are used for cropping and horticulture, which is about 2% of the continent's land area. And it's truly amazing that even if that tiny little bit of 2% of the land area, it managed to somehow consume 60% of the water. 60% of our water use goes to ag. And that 2% is located at strategic, fertile, watered sweet spots, which are essential for the entire landscape. So it really does distort the biodiversity picture across the continent. We often hear in ag's defense that it's feeding the world, and that's a bit ridiculous. There's your Aussie-fed portion of the world, and there's the portion of the world fed elsewhere. So we got this astonishingly fragile continent, and we convince ourselves that it's really important to us to flog about 60% of it in order to feed the world when we're not. You know, that's a deception. And the other thing is the amount of export income that we have. If you net it out, we export about 284 billion. We import about 209 billion, 75 billion in agricultural products. That's the difference between the two. And for that, we're using 350 million hectares of country, which gives you a return of about $214. Now, I'm just trying to point out that, as Philippa mentioned earlier, even if you use traditional classical economic comparative advantage terms, Australia's got a lot to offer other than competing on world markets for commodity crops. We've got a lot better things we could be doing with this country. So ag impacts, bottom line, instead of trying to pay farmers to do ecosystem services, how about we admit that ag doesn't feed that many people, it doesn't add that much to the national economy, it doesn't employ that many people, has a huge impact on the land and the water, and is just degrading ecosystems across the continent. Farmers are great. I love farmers, but the farming system is absolutely stuffed. So markets aren't the answer. It's public policy that we need. I'd focus on three things: a national regional food security focus, which is determined to build landscape resilience, use fiscal policy, like Peter mentioned, to provision good jobs in the outback, to actually build real communities with a real future, do something other than farming, and use fiscal policy to pay for it. And to get all that done, we're going to have to transition from private property to suite of commons. That's my three recommendations. The rest of the rave is in the paper, and I encourage you to read it. Thank you for your time. Cheers.